games immediately following this special edition of Nightline.
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline.
Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov.
Flags are at half-mast in the Soviet Union, a nation mourning the loss of its leader, a world waiting to find out who will succeed him. Tonight, after Yuri Andropov, what next?
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Just a few blocks down 16th Street from the White House sits the Soviet Embassy here in Washington. It is where those who wish to offer their condolences to the Soviet government and people can do so on this day. Among those doing so this evening, Secretary of State George Shultz and Undersecretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, here being escorted out by Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. Perhaps there was more than just the diplomatic courtesy involved, because the passing of a Soviet leader, difficult as it may be for the Kremlin, offers a rare opportunity to at least modify U.S.-Soviet relations. All over the world today, the event and its possible implications dominated the news.
It is after midnight in Moscow. The Soviet flag, the hammer and sickle, has been lowered to half-staff over the Kremlin. Yuri Andropov, the Soviet president, dead at 69.
Under his leadership, the Central Committee and the Soviet state consistently carried out on the international arena the Leninist external political course, the course against the threat of thermonuclear war, strong rebuff to imperialism, and strengthening of peace and security of people.
Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov guided the Leninist peace policy of the party and the Soviet state at a time when international pressures were increasing, following the policy of increased confrontation and the growing arms race pursued by the USA and NATO.
Here, Mrs. Thatcher said she had learned of Mr. Andropov's death with regret. She said his loss will be widely felt. Opposition MPs and at least one Conservative urged the Prime Minister to go to the Moscow funeral.
It's fair to say that Andropov tried very hard to improve relations both with China and with the West, but he failed because neither took the hand offered out.
The German federal government hopes for improved links with the Soviet Union. Government aide Sutov said Bonn was prepared for discussions on all levels with this aim in view. Chancellor Kohl will be attending Andropov's funeral in Moscow.
With us now live in our Washington bureau is Richard Burt, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. Since we end on the note of Chancellor Kohl attending, why is President Reagan not?
Well, Ted, I don't think it's unusual that the president isn't going to the funeral. You'll recall that at the Brezhnev funeral, the president sent the vice president. He plans to have the vice president attend the funeral again. It shouldn't be read as any particular political signal. The president is prepared to meet with the Soviet leadership when we believe there are opportunities to make concrete progress in the relationship. And I don't think we should think of the U.S.-Soviet relationship in terms of personal chemistry. We should recognize that there are real differences in the relationship and that we are prepared to have a dialogue. Only recently, the Secretary of State, of course, met with Foreign Minister Gromyko.
There are some suggestions that when George Bush goes over, one of his missions will be to kind of feel out what the chemistry might be, or what the environment might be for a meeting between President Reagan and whoever the future Soviet leader will be, correct?
Well, I think it's just too premature. Of course, we will want to see what comes from any meetings that take place in Moscow, but the president's position on a summit remains the same. He's prepared to sit down when we have an opportunity to make real progress in the relationship.
You made a point a moment ago, Secretary Burt, that relationships such as exist between the United States and the Soviet Union do not depend upon personal chemistry, but there is a possibility that a whole new generation of Soviet leadership may come into power, either this time or very shortly from now. Won't that make a difference?
Well, it could make a difference, but of course the experts disagree. Some believe that a younger generation would be easier to deal with, perhaps more sophisticated, more managerial in their style. But other people believe that a younger generation might be even more aggressive. So I think we have to wait and see what emerges. We have to maintain our existing posture, which, as the President has made very clear, is a determination to protect our interests, but an openness to dialogue, a willingness to sit down and negotiate if the Soviet Union is ready to negotiate.
I realize you can't tell us much in this regard, but give us some sense of what goes on inside the U.S. government at a time like this. Is the world in a more heightened state of, not danger, but tension, alertness?
No, I don't think that's an accurate description. I mean, we recognize that there is some uncertainty. We don't know what precisely is going on in the Soviet Union. Of course, we haven't known for many years what's really going on in the Soviet Union, and of course we haven't seen Mr. Andropov for 6 months. But I think that more than anything else, we stress continuity. We don't base our policies on any particular leader. We base our policies on the Soviet Union.
Well, let me take it for instance, Lebanon right now. There has always been the opportunity for a U.S.-Soviet confrontation in that region. Does the United States government at a time like this exercise a little more caution than it might otherwise for fear of upsetting what is already a very tender and delicate situation?
Well, I think even in normal circumstances, we exercise prudence, and we maintain, I think, channels to the Soviet Union. As you know, the Secretary of State regularly meets with Ambassador Dobrynin here in Washington. Our ambassador in Moscow meets with the Soviet Foreign Ministry officials. So I think that the idea that we haven't had lines of communication open to the Soviet Union isn't correct.
Well, of course, that wasn't what I asked. What I asked was whether, in fact, at the moment, there is more U.S. sensitivity toward what the Soviets may fear or suspect. In other words, is this a time when we tread particularly cautiously?
Well, I think we recognize that we know less right now than we normally do about the Soviet Union. I don't know, I think that forces us to be a little bit cautious, but I don't think it forces us to change our policies in any major way.
All right, Secretary Byrd, thanks very much for joining us this evening. When we return, we'll talk with former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. We'll look at the process of choosing a new Soviet leader and some likely prospects. And later, an insider report on the man who won't be going to Andropov's funeral.
ABC News Nightline, brought to you by The Equitable.
The good life in America means reaching for your dream.
It means building. Building is in our blood. As one of the largest real estate investors, the Equitable puts up skyscrapers, malls, hospitals, hotels. But what we're building is a better way of life.
We are the Equitable. Yes, we'll help you live the good life. We are the Equitable. We can help your dreams come true.
The party the office was throwing for the personal computer was getting a little dull. It seemed compatibility was the problem, until one latecomer arrived with a stunning solution, the Sperry PC. It ran all IBM-compatible software and communicated with something a lot of people had in common, the main computer, Sperry's, IBM's, or both. The Sperry PC. It's what the personal computer should have been in the first place.
This is the story of 964 men and women who set out to attempt the physical achievement of a lifetime. Almost 2.5 miles swimming, 112 miles biking against winds gusting to 50 miles an hour, and then a full marathon, all in one day. Some intended to win this grueling event. Most just hoped to survive. But no one will ever forget this Ironman Triathlon World Championship. Saturday on ABC's Wide World of Sports.
20 years ago, 3 schoolgirls made a secret pact.
I demand to know which one of you is pregnant.
And left an innocent child alone to survive any way she could.
Who wants a porno queen for a daughter?
But she clawed her way out of the gutter, and she's come to pay them back.
I'll find out which one is my mother, my way.
Feel the romance and revenge, the passion and its price. Where innocence ends, lace begins. February 26th on ABC.
Is the pressure to grow up faster destroying our children?
If you're depressed, you'll want to get high.
It was easier to go out and get drunk than to deal with my problems.
We're losing too many of our best kids.
How is your child coping with stress?
Monday, watch ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Joining us now live in our New York studios is former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Dr. Kissinger, opportunities and dangers at a moment like this. Opportunities, first of all.
Well, I suppose when the Soviet leadership has shaken down, there is an opportunity to restart the dialogue. And I believe in any event, as the Soviets are working out their succession problem, that they're going to want a period of respite. So I think the opportunity is lower tension, and maybe for the Soviet leadership to make decisions that couldn't be made while Andropov was so ill.
All right, let's stay on the opportunity for a moment. Why then did you recommend this morning that President Reagan not go at this time? It would have been a gesture, would it not? A symbolic act?
I don't think any gesture is needed. I think we must avoid the impression that this is a personal understanding between misunderstanding between two gentlemen. There are objective causes for these difficulties. They have to be removed by patient and serious discussions. President Reagan made a speech in which he indicated his willingness to talk, and I think it is a very grave mistake that is happening throughout the West of reducing this into an issue of personalities.
Well, it's not an issue of personalities, obviously, because each country has its own objective interests, but after all, the leaders have to be able to deal with one another, and as you said a moment ago, it is an opportunity, so why not grasp it?
Yes, there is an opportunity, but there's an opportunity for what? At this point, we don't even know who the Soviet leadership is. Chernenko, who is in charge of the funeral arrangements, was defeated in the Andropov succession and was demoted in the during the Andropov rule. I believe the opportunity that exists is to put before the Politburo our vision of the future, our notion of how one should negotiate, to receive in a spirit of understanding whatever response that they might want to give, and get a dialogue started. And then later this year, the president can meet with the Soviet leadership when they are settled down and when preparatory work has been done. So I think he took absolutely the right decision.
All right, what about dangers?
Well, the dangers are that the Soviet system will become even more paralyzed by whatever power struggles that could exist. And if an international crisis occurs that they didn't particularly seek, that this could escalate because there's nobody there in authority to stop the spiral. A little bit like this Korean airplane incident really got out of all proportion because nobody on the Soviet side seemed to know how to make the few gestures that would have been needed to bring it to a conclusion.
Well, we certainly have at the moment enough crises going on in the world that could escalate out of control. Apply what's happening now in the Soviet Union, or not happening for that matter, to the Lebanon situation.
Well, I think actually that the opportunities are much greater than the dangers. I cannot imagine that the Politburo in the Soviet Union, engaged as it must be in deciding between the geriatric generation and the younger generation, and between the role of the military and the role of the Communist Party, that it will escalate a crisis. Crisis management requires somebody in authority who can make constant decisions. So unless we behave with in an enormously provocative fashion, which I consider out of the question, I do not really think that there are very great dangers.
What then are the objective realities of the U.S.-Soviet relationship that transcend Andropov's death or his replacement then by Chernenko or by Romanov or any one of the others?
Well, the objective realities are that first we have to get the negotiations on limitations of arms started again. Secondly, we have to have a serious talk about the attempt, at least in recent years, by the Soviet Union to undermine the international balance of power by supporting guerrilla movements, revolutionary movements in every part of the globe, and by their recent attempt to split Western Europe from the United States. We have to establish some agreed code of conduct between the superpowers that possess these enormous weapons. Then we can also talk about trade and other aspects. So there's a wide agenda that has not been addressed for many years now.
Well, the only thing that confuses me is, on the one hand, you seem to suggest that it doesn't make a great deal of difference who's at the helm in the Soviet Union, but on the other hand, here we are with apparently our policy in abeyance because we've got no one to talk to.
It makes a difference who is at the helm in the Soviet Union in terms of getting the Soviet machinery of government organized. What seems to have happened in recent months is with the General Secretary of the Communist Party out of action everybody was concerned with the succession problem, and nobody wanted to make any new departures or was in a position to make any critical decisions. The Soviet system is a strange combination of a heavily bureaucratized system, and that requires, however, the machinery of the top-level bureaucracy to function, and that is in the control of the General Secretary. What I do not believe makes a great deal of difference is the personal relationship between the top Soviet leaders and the top American leaders. The best relationship between those is one of respect and precise calculation. The president who managed it best was President Nixon, who did not attempt to charm anybody.
Secretary Kissinger, thanks very much for joining us this evening. In a moment, we'll talk with an expert on how the Soviet inner circle chooses its new leaders, and Carl Bernstein will have an insider report on how the White House inner circle decided who would represent the U.S. at Andropov's funeral.
There's perhaps only one 10-minute dinner you'd serve with a 10-year-old wine. Le Menu frozen dinners. Each Le Menu is perfectly planned, like tender chicken parmigiana with fettuccine alfredo and Italian green beans. But it's worth remembering, Le Menu also goes well with just water. Le Menu dinners from Swanson.
Spend $13,000 for a Volkswagen and get the fully equipped, German-engineered Quantum. Or spend the same thing on another European Grand Touring sedan and get something like this. Or this. Or even this. All of which would lead you back to this, Quantum. It's not a car, it's a Volkswagen.
Come on, Dad, I want to help.
Couldn't just come by and say hello?
I came by to tell you about direct deposit because you've earned it.
Yeah.
Then your Social Security goes straight to your account and you earn all the interest you've got coming.
Look, I've already got direct deposit.
What?
Say, but there is something you can do for me.
Yeah?
You got a match?
Ask for direct deposit wherever you have a checking or savings account. It's free, and after all, you've got it coming.
It was the hardest day of my life. I'd have to leave college, not because of my grades, because of money. I'd never be a doctor.
When bright young minds can't afford college, America pays the price. But the United Negro College Fund works to keep college affordable at 42 predominantly black colleges.
Thanks to the United Negro College Fund, today I'm Dr. Linda Doty White.
Support the United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Okay. Now, doesn't that look good? Yeah, let that.
Hi, I'm Everett Alvarez of the Veterans Administration. I was a prisoner of war for over 8 years, so I know what it's like to be alone at a difficult time. Some of our hospitalized veterans do not have family nearby to visit them. I'm asking you to be their family during our National Salute to Hospitalized Veterans the week of February 14. Call your local Veterans Administration Medical Center listed under U.S. Government in your telephone book.
I'm David Hartman. What's the future for U.S.-Soviet relations after the death of Yuri Andropov? Next week on Good Morning America, we'll continue to cover the events in the Soviet Union and the developing Soviet leadership on Good Morning America.
Jim Lampley and I will return with ABC's coverage of the Winter Olympic Games immediately following Nightline.
The question that people in the Soviet Union are asking themselves tonight is probably the same question being asked in much of the rest of the world. Here now is our Moscow Bureau Chief, Bob Zelnick, with a report on some of the potential successors to Yuri Andropov and how the decision will be made.
Tonight, as they mourn the death of Yuri Andropov, the Soviet people are waiting to learn who the new General Secretary will be. He'll be chosen secretly. They'll play no role in his selection. The ruling 12-man Politburo will undoubtedly decide who succeeds Andropov if it hasn't already done so. Its decision will be ratified by the roughly 300 members of the Communist Party Central Committee. The Soviet press will never report the Politburo action. It will, without fail, report the Central Committee vote as unanimous. The Soviet people vote for neither Politburo nor Central Committee members. During most of Soviet history, such leaders as Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev consolidated their power slowly. but then wielded it with very great authority. Yuri Andropov won a clear-cut victory over Konstantin Chernenko in the battle to succeed Brezhnev, but even had Andropov not fallen gravely ill, there were signs his power would have to be shared with Politburo figures representing the powerful military and Communist Party establishments. These groups, represented on the Politburo by very old men, are probably not today ready to anoint a younger man General Secretary. Chernenko, 72, a Brezhnev protege, is the leading older candidate. Today, he was placed in charge of Tuesday's funeral, possibly an important sign. The leading younger contender, Mikhail Gorbachev, 52, an agriculture specialist given broad responsibilities by Andropov to bring new blood into the Communist Party leadership. In recent years, death has claimed such Soviet leaders as Suslov, Brezhnev, and now Andropov. Still, men in their mid to late 70s cling to such posts as defense, foreign, and prime ministers. Whoever the new general secretary, the process of Soviet leadership transition is still far from complete. This is Bob Zelnick for Nightline.
With us now live via satellite from London is Peter Frank, senior lecturer on Soviet government at Essex University in England and an expert on the subject of succession to the power in the Soviet Union. Must make you a very lonely man, because most experts on that subject are uniformly wrong time after time after time. Any chance that you experts will be a little more correct this time around?
Well, of course, one can only work on precedents with Soviet successions, and precedents are there to be broken. But if precedent means anything, then there are probably three men who are in the running at the present time. There's Chernenko, there's Mikhail Gorbachev, and then there's also Romanov, the secretary from Leningrad, who's now based in Moscow.
All right, let's divide them into two groups, because Chernenko, of course, is the member of what Dr. Kissinger referred to as the geriatric set. What's the likelihood of his taking over?
Well, I should have thought that it's improbable, given that if they appoint him, then almost certainly they're calling for another succession crisis in a very short time. On the other hand, he's an ambitious man, he's a healthy 72, and that ambition may well have carried him through, because he still has quite a lot of support in what is still a rather old Politburo.
All right, now he was the man who was doing for Andropov what Andropov did for Gromyko. That is, he's running the funeral arrangements, and in the arcane world of Kremlinology, that supposedly has some meaning, does it?
Well, it could do, and there's a more recent precedent for that. A few months ago, Rashidov, who was the party first secretary in Uzbekistan down in Central Asia, he died, and interestingly enough, the man who ran the funeral there a few days later was appointed his successor. So that could mean that this is becoming an established precedent and a fairly reliable pointer to what might happen.
All right, tell us a little bit about the other two, Gorbachev and Romanov. Gorbachev, by Soviet standards, is a mere callow youth, isn't he? He's what, 52?
He is indeed. He's not 53 until next month, and strangely enough, that youth could work against him, because there's no real way of changing leaders in the Soviet political process. It's very difficult to get rid of them, it's very difficult to put them in. And this means that once they're in, if they play their cards right, as Brezhnev did for 18 years, then they're there for a very long time. And the prospect of having somebody there for what could be up to a quarter of a century is not going to endear the prospects to other candidates.
All right,
so to that extent, he could be too young.
A very, very quick political profile of him. What difference would it make if he were in?
Well, I think he too would go for efficiency. Agriculture is his particular problem, and of course it's what's known as the Achilles heel of Soviet domestic politics.
Does he know anything at all about foreign policy?
Well, he's not a specialist in foreign policy, but Andropov gave him some exposure. He's been to Canada, he had discussions with Pierre Trudeau when he was in Canada, and since then he's been to Portugal. So he has been getting a bit of experience in that field, but he's still pretty inexperienced compared to others.
Forgive me for rushing you, but we're down to our last minute. Romanov, tell me a little about him.
Well, Romanov's a very tough character, a very efficient administrator. He comes from Leningrad, the second city of the USSR, and by all accounts he really is a very hard cookie. But he, if he did get into power, would certainly want to run things in a fairly orthodox fashion so far as domestic politics are concerned.
If I forced you to make a choice among the three, first of all, are you sure it's going to be one of those three? And secondly, if you do, which one?
Well, I think it will come from amongst those three. The pointers are for Chernenko. Everybody thinks that it's going to be Gorbachev. I have a hunch it might be Romanov.
Whoops, I think I heard you say all three of them there.
I did.
Is there any one you want to pick?
Okay, I'll go for Romanov.
All right, thank you. In a moment, tonight's Insider Report. Carl Bernstein on why Ronald Reagan isn't going to Andropov's funeral.
America, land of instant gratification. The only trouble is American business wants profits delivered like overnight packages and economic solutions served up like instant pudding. We're W.R. Grace & Company. For 130 years, our growth has always been planned by people dedicated to the long-term point of view. Short-term thinking has never been our way of doing business. That doesn't mean all things instant are all that bad. But with more long-term planning, something much more positive is bound to develop. At W.R. Grace, we want all of us to stay one step ahead of a changing world. For more of our thoughts on long-term thinking, call 1-800-323-1000.
No diet in the world will help you lose weight until you do one thing: control your appetite.
With Dexatrim, I was able to control my appetite, and I lost weight.
The extra-strength Dexatrim diet plan, the strongest appetite control formula you can buy without prescription. Dexatrim helps you eat less and lose weight.
Dexatrim curbed my desire to eat. I lost weight because I ate less.
Extra-strength Dexatrim. No appetite control capsule works harder to help you lose weight.
The YWCA, helping women of all ages compete in a computerized world, in new career skills, in non-traditional employment opportunities, in leadership and management training, for all races, creeds, and ethnic backgrounds. The YWCA. Check it out for what it can do for your body, mind, and spirit. The YWCA, still pioneering to train you to make a difference in your community, in the world.
Kathleen Sullivan and I will continue with ABC's coverage of the Winter Olympic Games immediately following Nightline.
The death of Yuri Andropov, as we've noted, posed one immediate question for the Reagan administration. Who would represent the United States at his funeral? In tonight's Insider Report, Carl Bernstein tells us why the decision was made that Vice President George Bush, rather than President Reagan, would head the U.S. delegation.
Why isn't Ronald Reagan going to Moscow? This morning, say administration insiders, White House Chief of Staff Jim Baker thought going was a great idea. The trip would drive Lebanon and the deficit off the front page and show the president as peacemaker. Senator Howard Baker urged him to go too, seeing an opportunity to improve the dismal state of U.S.-Soviet relations. But the president, say aides, was reluctant from the beginning. Practical problems were cited by Secretary of State Shultz and National Security Advisor McFarlane. Whom would Mr. Reagan meet? No successor had been announced, and the White House had no idea if one would be by Tuesday's funeral. There was the matter of precedent. Why go for Andropov, a transitional leader the president had never met, when he didn't attend the funeral of Leonid Brezhnev? The trip could backfire, advised Deputy Chief of Staff Mike Deaver. The president could be accused of grandstanding, would have to cancel meetings with two key Mideast leaders next week, Hussein of Jordan, Mubarak of Egypt, just as American policy in Lebanon seemed to be disintegrating. Some ex-members of the administration suggested that Mr. Reagan's shaky grasp of foreign policy issues might make a hasty journey risky. Finally, say his aides, the president told them unless there was some guarantee of solid accomplishment, he just wasn't going, and thus the matter was decided. This is Carl Bernstein in Washington.
The topics on This Week with David Brinkley Sunday are the changeover in Moscow and the new situation in Lebanon. And stay tuned next for ABC Sports, continuing coverage of the 14th Winter Olympic Games from Sarajevo. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. To obtain a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Journal Graphics, Box 234, and Sonia Station, New York, New York, 10023. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.
When we close this box,